Since the beginning of civilization, there have been those who have acted as watchmen on the tower, warning their civilizations of coming outside threats, and the start of decay, of the rot, of treachery and treason from within inside its walls, often ignored by its civilization to its detriment and destruction. And I set watchmen over you, saying, listen to the sound of the trumpet. But they said, we will not listen. Therefore, hear, O nations, and know, O congregations, what is among them. Hear, O earth, behold, I am bringing disaster on this people, the fruit of their plans, because they have not listened to my words. And as for my laws, they have rejected it also. The most dangerous man to any government is the man who is able to think things out for himself, without regard to the prevailing superstitions and taboos. Almost inevitably, he comes to the conclusion that the government he lives under is dishonest, insane, and intolerable. And so, if he is romantic, he tries to change it. And even if he is not romantic personally, he is very apt to spread discontent among those who are. The ideal government of all reflective men, from Aristotle onward, is one which lets the individual alone, one which barely escapes being no government at all. This idea, I believe, will be realized in the world 20 or 30 centuries after I have taken up my public duties in hell. Okay, so I'm going to start out with some clarifications. That when I say prophets and watchmen, I don't mean it in a religious sense, but more in a secular sense. That these people are acting out these functions to our society and our civilization. They are performing this function of a prophet, the function of a watchman, warning, seeing these things coming, and predicting them before they happen with pretty good accuracy. As the light of freedom dims in our nation, and the very ideas that form the soul of our country are extinguished, allow me to tell you two stories that I found very similar. One from the New Deal era, and the other from now, in our time, and is playing out. One is about a man named William A. Wirt. The other is about the man who found Joe Biden's laptop, John Paul Mac Isaac, and how he was discredited. And not only them, but the news that ran his story was labeled as fake news, and then even Twitter banned them. But I'm going to show you how both men were found to be right and correct, and how the media itself plays a role in suppressing public opinion and shaping and forming it. It was Edward Bernays in his book Propaganda that said, "We are governed, our minds molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society. Our invisible governors are in many cases unaware of the identity of their fellow members in the inner cabinet. They govern us by their qualities of natural leadership, their ability to supply needed ideas, and by their key position in the social structure. Whatever attitude one chooses towards this condition, it remains a fact that in almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons, a trifling faction of our 120 million who understand the mental process and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world." William A. Wirt, traveling with his wife to the nation's capital from Gary, Indiana, in April 1934, knew nothing of this key vector of Soviet-directed assault on the American Republic about to take shape. Wirt, a national noted school superintendent, didn't know who Whittaker Chambers was, let alone Harold Ware, Alger Hiss. He knew nothing about other secret communists at the AAA, Lee Pressman, John Abt, Charles Kramer, and Nathan Witt. For example, Wirt nonetheless believed a secret revolution was underway, and he was in Washington to testify before a select House committee about his unexpected brush with it.
Mac Isaac. How are you, sir?
I'm pretty good. Thanks for having me on the show.
You bet. So can you tell me, this whole thing started on a Friday night, and Hunter Biden walks into your shop, right?
Yeah, it was Friday, April 12th, about 10 minutes before I closed. And on a Friday night, I was kind of excited to get out of the shop. Unfortunately, that excitement was shot down when Hunter walked in clutching 3 liquid-damaged MacBook Pros that he wanted to get data recovery from.
Did he? Did you know who he was at first?
No, I'm visually impaired. So
Okay.
when people walk in the store, I can't really see who they are. It wasn't until I started collecting his personal information and I requested his name and phone number and email that he was surprised that I didn't recognize him instantly. I guess he thinks he's some sort of local celebrity.
Yeah. All right. So take us through what happened. You had the laptops and you were asked to take all of this information off the hard drive. When you do that, normally do you see what's on the hard drive or is it just a transfer?
Well, in a perfect world, if it's say a transfer from a perfectly healthy machine to whatever the customer wants me to transfer it to, that process is generally automated. In this case, the one laptop that I was able to recover data from and that I actually checked in, that was a liquid damaged machine. It had power and stability issues. So I started to do a transfer and the power cut out on it. So I had to basically piecemeal the transfer over the next couple of days where I'd get it to power on long enough for me to manually drag a folder to drop it to our secure store server. In that process, because it's not automated and there's no automatic verification process, I had to verify that the data I was copying was intact. And it's in that verification process that I was made aware that there was some sensitive, embarrassing, and potentially criminal material on the laptop.
Okay, so you fixed it and you expected him to come back and you weren't going to do anything with the laptop, right?
Well, at that point in time, I completed the repair on April 16th or 15th. I gave him a ring to have him drop off an external hard drive so that I could transfer the data back. And he did. He came into the shop, dropped off a 2 terabyte Western Digital external hard drive, I believe he got from Best Buy. And I proceeded to copy the data that I recovered to that drive. He also requested that I pay him electronically through the Square credit card processing, which sends out an email and then an automated reminder. I then proceeded to call him the next day to let him know it was ready, and then I proceeded to call him to let him know it was ready for a couple weeks after that, and never got a response again.
So after 90 days, what happens to the laptop?
After 90 days on the paperwork that he signed, it clearly states that after 90 days, any abandoned property becomes the property of the Mac shop. So when it became my property, I wanted to make sure what I had seen was real because I hadn't looked at the laptop during that entire time. And I think it was mid-July where I finally dove into it. And that's when mainly because Burisma and Hunter were in the news cycle during the summer. I was very concerned that, somebody would come looking for the embarrassing content. When he dropped off the laptop, his dad wasn't running for president.
Right.
But 2 weeks later, his dad's running for president, and I fully expected the Secret Service to kick down my door and take the laptop and me away. That's not terrifying. Unheard of, and I think we've seen demonstrated recently that the Secret Service is the Biden's cleaner service. So I had a legitimate fear. And then also my concern that there was material on the laptop that was part of a criminal investigation.
And so you gave it to the FBI. You, at this point, still trusted the FBI somewhat.
I trusted the FBI enough to know that this was the proper channel. This is what I had to do. I didn't, after witnessing what happened to Roger Stone that previous January, having witnessing the weaponization of the Department of Justice and the FBI during the Mueller investigation, I was definitely concerned. So that's why I enlisted my father, who was a 31-year career military colonel, to go to the Albuquerque FBI, because I was trying to keep myself out of this like a secret.
His evidence came from a series of conversations he had with government personnel in meetings and at a soon-to-be notorious dinner party regarding their concrete plan for the proposed overthrow of the established American social order. As Wirt put it, these officials, it bears notice, were mainly employed by the same New Deal agencies from which Whittaker Chambers was to marshal forces to fan out across the U.S. government. Wirt's assessment of the radicalism within the folksy titled New Deal had preceded him to Washington, having made it into the congressional record and then the newspapers. The fundamental trouble with the brain trusters, he wrote, is that they start with a false assumption. They insist the America of Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln must first be destroyed, and then on the ruins they will reconstruct an America after their own pattern. Out of the political pandemonium that ensued, a select House committee emerged to investigate, or, as the Democrat New Deal majority preferred, to lay the matter to rest.
I had a business and a place in my community. Sure. I didn't want to lose any of that. So I enlisted my father. He approached the Albuquerque, I want to say it was October 8th of 2019, the Albuquerque FBI office, and he was promptly kicked out. He was asked to lawyer up and don't talk about this. And
holy cow.
He made an effort to try to get them to drive, and they seemed not interested whatsoever in touching it with a 10-foot pole. So we felt pretty defeated at that point, and it was about a month later when an FBI agent reached out to my father in an effort to get a hold of me. A couple of weeks after that, I had the FBI meet me at my house. I expressed my concerns for my safety and what I was hoping to achieve by going to the FBI, which was basically get this thing out of my shop and give me some level of protection. If somebody comes looking for it, I want a phone number that I can call, and I have someone that I can reach out to should something go bad.
On April 10th, 1934, in the same caucus room where Whittaker Chambers would testify 14 years later, witness Wirt would have his say, but barely. The powers that be understood that Wirt's story of radicalism in the Roosevelt administration might distract from or even halt their political movement. Thus, the select committee of 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans would merely go through the motions, and not even all of them. Contrary to custom and by party line vote 3-2, Wirt wouldn't be allowed to read his 10-minute opening statement, wouldn't have benefit of counsel 3-2, and wouldn't be permitted to rebut charges against him 3-2. Not even after he was falsely accused of having been jailed for German sympathies during World War 1917 through 18. Hitler, too, would be invoked to smear Wirt. Most important of all, the committee voted 3-2 not to call any of the key administration officials Wirt cited in his testimony. Not the agricultural department official who told him about talk in the AA about retarding the economy recovery in order to speed up the revolution, nor the House officials planning to collectivize American workers in government-planned communities, nor the brain trusters advocating the seizure of the economy and the destruction of laissez-faire.
When this finally broke in the New York Post, you were destroyed. Your business was destroyed. You were, 51 different intelligence experts signed a statement saying that this was Russian disinformation, which made you, in league with the Russians.
Yeah.
I know because we reached out to you and you were like, I'm just trying to get out of here. I don't want to do any interviews. I want to get out of here. How afraid for your life were you?
House Democrats preferred, in the words of the scathing Minority Report on the Wirt investigation, to leave Wirt's testimony as heresy. It then could be smacked down by denials in the press and majority rule. Indeed, within an hour of Wirt's hearing, such denials followed in rapid order. So too did a countercharge from the dinner party attendees. All mid-level government officials, 5 U.S. and 1 Soviet, Wirt had cited for what he described as revolutionary statements. Not only, they told the press, had they not made any of the statements, Wirt alleged, Wirt himself had monopolized all conversation to the point where no one else had been able to say anything at all. As they told it, he just never stopped talking.
It really started the morning of October 14th. The New York Post released a story at 6:30 in the morning, and I was getting death threats by about 6:45. So it didn't take long for people to make the connection, and then it really didn't. Initially, it was I'm a hacker, I'm a thief. How could I do this?
Yeah.
The narrative slowly shifted to Putin thanks you for your service, and you're a stooge for Russia, and to have that idea out there that I colluded with a foreign power to affect an election, I mean that's treasonous. And I come from a very distinguished military family, and to have that have the label traitor attached to my name is just it's devastating for me.
Did you ever think that your country would do this to you?
No, I didn't. I really did not expect what I witnessed on October 14th. I mean, within 3 hours of the Post releasing the story, there was this digital iron curtain that descended around the story, and anybody trying to report on it. The New York Post was blocked from Twitter for 2 weeks. To see that level of collaboration and collusion, I figured out rather quickly that this had to be something they were prepared for. They were waiting for this to happen. And I think when Zuckerberg was dragged before Congress, on October 25th, and he said that the FBI reached out in late summer to Facebook, Twitter, and Google to warn them of a massive dump of foreign intelligence that's going to affect the election, and to be ready for it. And I can only imagine that was because on August 28th is when I overnighted a copy of Hunter's Drive to Rudy Giuliani's office. And if they had the next week, the FBI warned them, it kind of begs the question, who was under surveillance? Was I being monitored, or was the office of the President of the United States being monitored?
There was nothing funny going on, however, at least as far as the committee Republicans were concerned. Refusing to sign the majority opinion that Wirt's statement were not true, the majority members scored the Democrats for refusing to permit any witnesses beside the dinner guest to be called, which prevented a bona fide investigation of Wirt's charges. Thus, the majority members made it inevitable that the proceedings would be a suppression of the truth rather than an uncovering of the truth. This, alas, would not be the last time, and such suppressions of the truth cover-ups would involve Republicans and Democrats alike.
Federal authorities, including the FBI, are investigating whether recently published emails that purport to detail, I should say, the business dealings of Joe Biden's son Hunter are connected to an ongoing Russian disinformation effort targeting the Biden campaign in the days leading up to the election. Let's discuss with the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Adam Schiff. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. Does it surprise you at all that this information Rudy Giuliani is peddling very well could be connected to some sort of Russian government disinformation campaign?
Well, we know that this whole smear on Joe Biden comes from the Kremlin. That's been clear for well over a year now, that they've been pushing this false narrative about the vice president and his son. And, the idea that the president, that the White House counsel and others were made aware that Giuliani was being used by Russian intelligence and using Russian intelligence in the sense of meeting with an agent of the Kremlin and pushing out this Kremlin false narrative. The idea that they were knowing and still on the floor of the Senate during the impeachment trial, pushing this Kremlin narrative is pretty breathtaking. But I guess at this point, we can't be shocked by anything this administration does, no matter how craven. But clearly, the origins of this whole smear are from the Kremlin, and the president is only too happy to have Kremlin help in trying to amplify it.
It's not like Rudy Giuliani is peddling this information in a vacuum, Congressman. Take a look at this picture of the president in the Oval Office holding up a copy of the New York Post, touting this conspiracy theory. It's made its way all the way to the commander-in-chief with a big smile on his face.
Yes. Well, look, I think we know who the driving force behind this smear has been all along, and it's been the president and the Kremlin. The Kremlin has an obvious interest in denigrating Joe Biden. They want Donald Trump to win. They recognize he's a weak president. He's been utterly unwilling to stand up to Putin and other autocrats.
You recently filed a lawsuit against Adam Schiff, and I want to say I love you for that. CNN, The Daily Beast, Politico. Why are you suing these guys?
Well, I think Adam Schiff is pretty clear. He had no problem going on Wolf Blitzer on the 16th of October to tell the American people that this was a operation run out of the Kremlin. He's supposed to be the chair of the Intelligence Committee, but he was handed zero intelligence. If anything, the intelligence community at the time was trying to convey that this had nothing to do with Russia. And he went on the news anyway to spread this narrative. And I think that's a major problem, because the narrative that was spread is the narrative that seems to be sticking for a lot of things. Let's blame Russia. Let's blame Russia for the 2016 election. Let's blame Russia for collusion with Trump. And they tried it again, except I'm the last person you could ever possibly call a Russian. My family has a history of fighting during the entirety of the Cold War against communism. So I think they just chose the wrong guy.
O'Connor admits helping to discredit Dr. Wirt. Former Representative John J. O'Connor, Democrat, New York, confessed in a statement today that he had helped prevent a thorough investigation in 1934 of charges by the late Dr. William A. Wirt that a group of New Dealers were plotting a new American Revolution. O'Connor, who was defeated for renomination in President Roosevelt's 1938 purge, said he was sorry for turning the thumbscrews on Wirt and expressed belief that most of the latter's charges had come true. Wirt, a Gary, Indiana school superintendent, created a national furor 6 years ago by asserting that there was a deliberately conceived plot among New Dealers to overthrow and establish social order in this country and establish a planned economy. O'Connor ranked next to Chairman Bullwinkle, Democrat, North Carolina, in a special House committee which investigated Wirt's charges. In his statement entitled "Confession is Good for the Soul," O'Connor said his participation in the Wirt incident was in my early rubber stamp support of the New Deal. Soon after its appointment, he declared, the committee met and discussed rules as to how to handle Dr. Wirt and to prevent the minority Republican members from converting the hearing into an investigation of the truth of the charges. The procedural motion, which I personally presented, he said, limited the hearing to an examination of Dr. Wirt under oath to bring out the names and the exact statements of his information. Over the protests of the minority members, any examination of the other persons connected in any way with said activities was precluded. This mea culpa of collusion, witness tampering, and character assassination is extraordinary. It is also obscure, a single voice of vindication for a singular voice. It is not so much that O'Connor has thrown into question whether a careful investigation of William Wirt's charges might have averted the the communist infiltration of the U.S. government that marks the middle decades of the 20th century and beyond. More revealing is the harsh light he shed on the political mechanism by which elected U.S. officials automatically sought to shield an apparent conspiracy from investigation against an airing of facts, even as they also casually sacrificed a good citizen to do so. This was, alas, the beginning of an era of American betrayal. In such an era, O'Connell confessions, too little, too late, buried as well, lost from what we retain of the historical record.